How's it going, everybody? I'm Graham from GrowthBook, and today I'm going to show you just how easy it is to get started with GrowthBook for feature flagging and experimentation with your NextJS application. So to get started, we're first going to install GrowthBook, and there's two ways to do that. The first is by self-hosting, and the second is by using our cloud version. The cloud version is super easy, just enter your email address and away you go. The self-hosting is a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to show you that right now. So to get started off, we're going to open up our terminal here. And just so you know, we're roughly following an article that Jeremy wrote on how to get started with feature flags with Next.js. This explains it step by step as well. So we'll show you this self-hosted version. You can use the Docker Compose file that we have listed in the documentation here, or you can use our GitHub repo to grab the latest version of that, and that's what I'm going to do now. So let's first grab this command, and then in our terminal here, we'll just make sure this is empty. Yep. And then we'll clone that GrowthBook repository. So we'll just change there. And now all we have to do to install GrowthBook is just docker compose up and then daemon. And what it's doing right now is grabbing the latest version of MongoDB and then the GrowthBook image that's uploaded to Docker Hub. The MongoDB is used for the internal storage for GrowthBook, and that's for things like experiment information, the feature flag information, the rules that you have assigned, snapshots of the experiments, but no personal information from your website ever hits GrowthBook unless you tell it to. The only information we store on the experimentation side is aggregate information. So it's quite safe and privacy focused, but again, you're self-hosting this, or you could self-host it. So it's all internal to your systems anyway. So if you are going to use the cloud version, I'll put the time codes in the bottom of this video so you can just skip right ahead to that part how you implement it, because the implementation steps are the same whether or not you use the self-hosted or the cloud version. So my internet seems to be a bit slow today, sorry about that. So once this is finished downloading and running, GrowthBook should be running entirely locally. GrowthBook uses port 3000 by default, so we're going to just open a page and do that as soon as this is finished. Great, there we go. So let's take a look, see if that works. Okay, so GrowthBook is now running, and we have to first set up our account. So first we give it a company name, like Acme Company. My name is Graham. And then enter your email address. Choose my work one, and then we'll just suggest a strong password. Great, so now GrowthBook is fully set up. It's running locally. You can start inviting users if you'd like, but probably don't want to install on your local host. You might want to do this on your actual environment that you're going to run it in. And then we show you the instructions on how to get started with feature flags, and it's pretty simple. So we're going to follow along with the React steps here, but first we have to get our React Next.js site set up. I actually don't have that set up yet, so I'm going to show you how to do that. So first we're going to create a Next.js application. Let me open my terminal again. Let's clear this. Okay. So we're going to create a directory. Well, actually, I think the Next.js installer might do that. Let's just open that up. So we're going to do yarn create next app. And I'm going to install it with TypeScript. It doesn't really matter. The code is pretty much the same for both. So we're going to call it Acmeco. This takes a few minutes to install. While this is installing, I'll just talk a little bit about the architecture of GrowthBook. It's a little bit different than other feature flag systems that you might have used in the past. Oh, well, it's finished anyway. That was fast. Great, so now we have Acmeco set up. So we should be able to launch our Next.js application by just doing yarn dev. I'm going to run it on port 4000. And let's see if that worked. And there's our Next.js application. So the final step before we get started, I'm going to open this Next.js application inside our IDE so I can easily edit the code. All right. So here it is, and let's just check. So here we have the app page, and then the index.php, which is index.tsx, which is what we're running right here. Let me just make this a little bit smaller. Cool. So to install GrowthBook, we first have to install the GrowthBook SDK onto our Next.js application. So let's do that now. Let's just stop this from running, and then grab the commands for installing it. It's just yarn add GrowthBook React. All of our SDKs are really lightweight, usually around 1K in size. So they're extremely fast, and everything is evaluated locally on the client, so you don't have to have any third-party dependencies if you don't want to. We do have to pull in the list of features from our website or from the GrowthBook instance, wherever that's running. Cool. So now we have that running. Let's just rerun our program, and then we're going to start installing GrowthBook. So the documentation is pretty easy for this. We have the page which includes the full script, so we're going to just go based off this. And we're going to pull this in. Let me make this a bit smaller so it fits. All right. So inside of our app container, we have the main component, and we're going to wrap this with the GrowthBook provider. And then the GrowthBook provider takes the instance of GrowthBook that we're going to create right now. So let's first import the libraries that we need. And then we're going to create the GrowthBook instance. Now, GrowthBook doesn't, if you're running an experiment through GrowthBook, we do not store the primary event data ourselves. We do connect to your existing event store, wherever that is. And that could be something like RudderStack, Mixpanel, Segment, Jitsi, whatever your main way of tracking events is. This is where you would add that event. Could even be Google Analytics. But at the moment, we're just going to leave it as a console log. So inside of our default app, we're going to do a use effect, which will update all the time. You can also have it update on the router, which is sort of typical, depending on what kind of attributes you're passing in. If these don't change, then you don't need to update them, but sometimes you might want to pass in the URL for targeting, and in which case you'll need to add the URL as the parameter for the use effect. I'm just going to leave this open for everything at the moment. You'll notice it has here this features endpoint, so we need to define what that is, and that is the URL that pulls in the list of all the features that are enabled for your application. So I'll show you at the moment what this is pulling. It is basically nothing because we haven't defined any features yet. So the way it works is you pull down a list of features. The features are then joined with the GrowthBook user attributes, and then there's a rule engine internal to the SDK that evaluates which of these users should see which feature depending on those conditions. So that's all set up. The only thing left to do is to wrap the component with the GrowthBook provider. So we'll do that now. That's down here. And there we go. So now GrowthBook is being passed into the GrowthBook provider, and now the use flag attributes and all the helper functions we have are available throughout the code base. So we can do an example of this. We'll show you. We'll create a flag around, say, the title. So let's go back to GrowthBook and create that. So we'll create our first feature, and we'll call it, I don't know, index title. And we're just going to leave this as a default op. We can change this later on. And then we're going to default it to the auth state. So that's now created a flag. We'll immediately pop up the instructions. So we're going to use the React version. So we're going to import the use feature component, and then we can just wrap the h1 in this. So the if feature enabled just will either load or not load the children elements underneath it depending on the state of the flag. Cool, so let's go and test that out. So we should first see that this is updated. Yep. So now it's returning the name of the feature, and then the default state is false. So if we go to our go to our Next.js application, now we don't have an h1. So we can also go back to GrowthBook, and we can change the default value to be on, and we should see it update here, true. And then if we go back to our Next.js application, now we're seeing it again. So already the feature flags are all enabled, they're all working, and the code is as easy as dropping one line around whatever feature you want to add. Cool, so now let's go a little bit deeper and let's add an experiment on top of that feature. So GrowthBook makes it super easy to turn any feature that you develop into an experiment. So to turn any experiment to a feature, first we're going to set it to default to off, and then you choose the targeting attribute you want to divide this experiment by, and default is user ID, which is usually what most people want. And then we're going to create this experiment 50-50 split. So if we go back to refresh our features, we can see that we have the default rules off, and then each variation has a weight of 50% each. So if we go back to the site, we can refresh, and okay, so it looks like we've been served the variation that has it off. And if we go back to our app, we can actually force ourselves into a different variation by changing our user ID. And looks like that, yeah, that one's still off, so we can try just one more time. Maybe we'll get one. Yeah, okay. So what's happening on the back end is that user ID is used with deterministic hashing to figure out which user case to put this user in. So as long as that user ID is the same, the user will always get put into that same condition. That means that GrowthBook doesn't actually use any cookies or store any information about the state, because it's deterministic every single time it's loaded. We also use the same hashing algorithm across all our SDKs, so it doesn't matter which SDK you use, you'll always get the same variation. So it allows you to do mixing and matching. So if you want to use like a React experiment on the front end and like a Python SDK on the back end, you can be sure that they'll get the same variation on the back. So finally, one of the really cool features about GrowthBook is that we have a GrowthBook DevTools, which you can get from the Chrome Web Store. And once this is added to your Chrome browser, you can then open up the console and go over to the GrowthBook tab. And there you can see all information about the page and what features are there, what experiments are there, and then expand any of these to see lots of debug information. Like this shows you the variations, and that it's 50-50 split, and any debugging that's happening in terms of which variation and why you're getting a particular variation over another. Also, for every feature, we show you can just toggle the features on and off, and we show you like why you're being served that particular feature and any debug information there as well. So sometimes the rules about how you serve a feature can get quite complex. So I'll show you an example where you can add targeting conditions over here. And these targeting conditions can be arbitrarily complex, and you can sort of nest them, and you can actually add multiple rules as well. And sometimes it can be really tricky to figure out why certain users are getting certain features, and all of that is exposed in the DevTools. So finally, the last thing we have, when we are put into an experiment, we fire that tracking callback. So here you can see the console log that we left in the code from the tracking callback that we initially set up. In another video, we'll show you how to set that up for Mixpanel and GA4 and Amplitude and all the other different types of event tracking you might have. But that's it for now. So yeah, look forward to that in another video, and thanks so much for watching.